There comes a point where being stuck stops feeling temporary. It starts to feel personal. You wake up with the same weight in your chest. You say the right prayers. You try to stay hopeful. You tell yourself not to force it. Maybe you even whisper, "Divine timing." But deep down, something in you is getting tired. Not dramatic, just tired in that quiet way people get when they have knocked on the same invisible door for too long. And this is the dangerous part. After a while, the mind stops asking, "How do I move?" and starts asking, "Maybe this is just my life." That is how stagnation becomes sacred by mistake. Not because it is holy, but because you have stopped questioning it. There is an old pattern in that, a very old one. In the story, Hiranyakashipu was not satisfied with power. Power was not enough for him. He wanted immunity. He wanted a life so perfectly sealed that consequence itself could not enter. So he built his protection with conditions. Not by man, not by beast, not in the day, not at night, not indoors, not outdoors, not on the earth, not in the sky, not by weapon. Listen to the psychology of that. This is not just a king asking for safety. This is ego trying to outdesign reality. He believed that if he named every category, he could master fate. If he covered every angle, he could become untouchable. And once a person believes that, something in them hardens. They stop listening. They stop bowing. They stop feeling the limits of their own mind. They mistake control for permanence. That is why this story matters now. Because most people do not build fortresses with boons. They build them with thoughts. Nothing will ever change for me. I have tried everything. This is just how life is. There is no opening here. And the moment you start speaking like that, the walls begin to feel intelligent, solid, final, absolute. But they are not. Every false fortress has a seam, and the deeper the arrogance behind it, the more certain you can be of one thing. Somewhere inside that locked structure, there is already a crack. What made Hiranyakashipu dangerous was not just his power, it was his certainty. He believed he had closed every door. He believed reality had been forced into a cage of conditions. And when a person starts thinking like that, they stop fearing truth. They only fear disruption. They do not ask whether they are aligned. They ask whether they are protected. That is the blindness. Because life does not always break a prison by smashing through the front. Sometimes it enters through the one space pride never bothered to respect. And that is exactly how Narasimha arrives. Not as a man, not as a beast, not in broad daylight, not in full night, not inside the palace, not outside it, not on the ground, not in the air, not with a weapon forged by hand. Look at how precise that is. This is not random destruction. This is divine intelligence moving through the gaps between categories, through the borderlines, through the places the arrogant mind ignores because it only trusts solid labels. Hiranyakashipu thought power meant covering every obvious angle. But existence is not made only of obvious angles. It is also made of thresholds, edges, twilight spaces, moments that are neither one thing nor the other. That was the flaw in his fortress. He understood rules, but not mystery. He understood control, but not living intelligence. He understood how to defend a structure, but not how truth moves when it is no longer willing to wait. So Narasimha does not merely defeat him, he exposes him. He reveals that the tyrant was never invincible, only overprotected by his own definitions. And this is where the story stops being ancient, because people do the same thing with their pain. They say, "I have looked at every option. There is nothing else to try. My life is just like this now." But those statements usually come from a tired mind, not a complete vision. We mistake our categories for reality. We think if we cannot see the opening, there must not be one. But the opening is often hidden in the in-between, in the pause before reaction, in the hour before sleep, in the moment when an old identity loosens, but the new one has not fully formed. That is the Narasimha principle. Not all change arrives by force. Some change arrives by finding the one sacred angle the prison forgot to guard. Now bring that out of myth for a moment and into ordinary life, because this is where people usually miss the point. They hear a story like Narasimha and think it belongs to another age, a palace, a tyrant, a divine intervention, something dramatic, something far away from rent, heartbreak, anxiety. burnout, silence at the dinner table. But most prisons do not look dramatic when you are living inside them. Most of them look normal. They look like waking up already defeated. They look like checking your phone before your own mind has even returned to you. They look like saying yes too quickly because you are tired of conflict. They look like lying in bed at night, replaying the same fear until it starts to sound like truth. That is how a false rule takes root, quietly, repeatedly, until one day you do not even notice it is running your life. Maybe your false rule is, nothing changes unless something big happens. Maybe it is, I need to feel ready first. Maybe it is, this is just who I am. That is how the inner fortress is built now, not with boons, with repetition. And this is where the loophole appears, because life is full of thresholds, small ones, ignored ones, sacred in a way most people never stop long enough to notice. The moment right after you wake up, before the old story fully returns, the few minutes before sleep, when the mind softens and stops gripping so hard, the single breath between being triggered and sending the message you will regret. The strange silence after disappointment, when you can either feed the wound again or refuse to hand it more authority. Those are not empty moments, they are openings. That is where patterns are weakest, not when you are making grand promises in a surge of motivation, not when you are trying to reinvent your whole life by Tuesday. In the small borderlands, in the unguarded places, in the minute that looks ordinary from the outside but decides the direction of the next 6 months. This is why some people stay stuck for years while thinking they are waiting on destiny, when really they are surrendering every threshold back to the same old self. You do not always need a bigger plan. Sometimes you need to stop abandoning the small door, because the old pattern is strongest in the routine, and so is the way out. So what do you actually do with this? You stop waiting for your whole life to open at once. You stop demanding a miracle big enough to convince your fear, and you begin where Narasimha always appears, at the edge. First, name the prison clearly, not poetically, clearly. What is the thing that keeps repeating? The same relationship pattern, the same hesitation, the same self-betrayal, the same inner sentence that quietly decides your behavior before the day even begins. Then ask a harder question. What false condition have you accepted as absolute? Maybe it is, I cannot move until I know the full plan. Maybe it is, peace will come when they finally understand me. Maybe it is, I have been this way too long to change now. That is the fortress talking. That is the old structure, trying to sound like truth. Now find the threshold, not the grand turning point, not the fantasy version of transformation, the real threshold, the 5 minutes after waking, the pause before answering, the lonely hour, when you usually fall back into the same craving, same memory, same weakness, the moment after disappointment, before you turn pain into identity again, and then do one precise thing differently, one honest message, one boundary kept, one morning without feeding the old script, one night where you let silence stay silence instead of filling it with fear, one breath that breaks the inheritance of your usual reaction. That is how the shift begins, not with noise, with accuracy. People think destiny changes when life becomes dramatic. Sometimes it does, but more often, it changes when a person stops cooperating with the pattern that has been draining them for years. Quietly, repeatedly, without applause. That is the deeper power in this story. Hiranyakashipu believed reality was sealed because he had named every condition. But life is never finished that way. There is always a threshold, always a seam, always a hidden place where false power loses its grip. So if your life has felt locked, do not worship the wall. Look for the edge. That may be where your next chapter is already waiting. And if you want to go deeper, I made a private breakdown on the exact threshold moments where old karma starts to loosen, the places most people overlook and then wonder why nothing changes. That full deep dive is on Patreon.